Welcome. This is Rachel Narveson with the NAPCP. I will be your host today for the 60-minute webinar, Exploring Alternatives to Your P-Card Software, which qualifies for 1 quarter point towards CPCP initial eligibility or recertification. The presentation will begin in just a moment. I would like to remind attendees that the question and answer portion will follow the presentation, but you may enter your questions throughout the presentation. Please type your questions into the online question box within the GoToWebinar dashboard. Amanda and Chris with Data Basics will moderate the questions and answers. Questions are anonymous. They will not reveal your name or organization name. If your question does not get addressed during the call, please use the contact information provided on the last slide. A copy of the recorded presentation will be available within our store, within 1 week. All right, now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Chris Harley.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks everyone for joining us here today. As Rachel mentioned, we're looking to take probably not the full hour, probably somewhere between about 45 and 50 minutes or so here today, and really go through the topic we're talking about today, which is exploring alternatives to your P-Card software. The primary focus is really going to be looking at some of the key challenges out there as it relates to the way organizations process their P-Cards and what solutions and tools are in place these days to really help you streamline and automate as much as you can as it relates to this. For those of you that aren't familiar with Data Basics or myself, again, my name is Chris Harley. I head up the sales organization here at Data Basics. I joined the organization back in 2000, so getting ready to hit 19 years here, and I certainly have seen a lot change not only within our organization, but just looking at the expense management market in general. I have spoken in the past at NAPCP events, and then for those of you that also dabble in the travel side of expense management, I've also worked with the folks at the Global Business Travel Association, and I've spoken there about how our application will manage travel expenses. But the focus today is really looking at P-Cards and what solutions are in place out there to really help you maximize those processes. For those of you who aren't familiar with Data Basics, we've been providing expense management solutions here for over 20 years. Our primary focus is working with organizations to solve your toughest challenge without having to make any sort of modifications to what you guys are doing, as well as with not having to create any sort of large customizations out there. So our big focus, and you'll hear that as I go through, what we have to offer is how we can easily configure a piece of software to manage what organizations are looking for. Our solutions do work with all major banks, accounting solutions, and travel providers, and we'll talk more to that as we go through this process here. As far as the agenda, what we're going to start with is just look at some of the key challenges that we see from organizations out there. We'll talk to what takes place and what we can do from a leveraging technology perspective to go out there and help organizations. I will cover how that process works as far as how we ultimately implement solutions out there. We will go through a demo of the solution just to show you guys at least what Data Basics offers out in the marketplace. And then we will put aside some time here at the end to go through some questions and answers. And so as Rachel mentioned, if you guys have questions as we go through the process, please feel free to go ahead and add them into the toolbar there for the GoToMeeting, and we'll make sure we cover them. Any questions we don't get to, we'll definitely follow up directly and answer those questions that you guys may have. And so with that, one of the first things we do have is just kind of a poll out there, which I'll let Rachel go ahead and kick off for just, how are you currently managing your P-Card processing today?
All right, have the poll launched here. So the first question here is, what is your method for managing your P-Cards today? There's banking software, spreadsheet, homegrown system, third-party expense reporting solution, or other. Got a large majority of folks here voting. We'll wait another 30 seconds here to give some folks time to respond. Again, just in case, the question is, what is your method for managing your P-Cards today? All right, another 5 seconds here, just in case for anyone last minute folks. All right, we're going to go ahead and close the poll here and show the results here. All right, there we go. All right, and we have 84% who said baking tool, baking software, 26% spreadsheet, 13% homegrown, 19% third-party expense reporting solution, and 10% other.
Okay, well, great. Well, thanks everyone for participating in that. And it's interesting as we start talking about kind of what your key challenges are, it's probably safe to say the challenge may probably stem from what you're currently using out there. And so as we go through this process, I'll try to kind of tackle each one of those as it relates to, where we see those challenges. And again, it certainly is going to depend upon what you're using out there to manage that process, whether you have a piece of technology in place or whether you're using something which is fairly manual, depending upon how you describe your internal spreadsheet. So as we talk about challenges, one of the first things I wanted to do was to use some research really that we got from NAPCP. So this is from a poll and a survey that went out a couple of years ago, where we asked the membership there is what your biggest challenge is out there. And what you see is there were 6 key areas that jumped out. And as we look at what we have on the screen, it really depends upon the different part of the process that we look at. So the first piece, of course, is managing the supporting documentation. So how do we go out and get the details of the documentation, not only that are out there, but how do we then get that information attached? So certainly keeping track of receipts. The second biggest challenge out there was looking at enforcing corporate policies out there. So how do we monitor and control what's taking place there as it relates to the P cards? And then we start looking at some of the areas as it relates to the accounting process, which is you will see in the bottom left-hand corner is how do we go ahead and get users to actually file and submit them. But then also as we are getting them to submit those receipts is how do we go out and do the proper allocation as it relates to the individual accounting process. And then the last two in the bottom left part of the screen, we start looking at just the matter of start looking at more of the administration side of this, which is how do we reconcile this data? And then how do we make sure that the users know what the policies are? And then, of course, even as we look at the administration side of that, is how much time and effort are we spending to go ahead and enforce those policies? Now, this was a poll that was taken from NAPCP. Interesting enough, as we go out and you would look at what we find from our individual managers, account managers out there talking to our customers, we would say that we get almost the identical feedback from our users out there and our customers out there. So with that, let's start talking really about the focus of the process here today, which is what alternatives do we have out there and how we have those challenges. And so as we had that poll to kind of talk about what you're currently doing, interesting enough, I kind of put in place a couple different areas here, how we see technology is being impacted. We see, and probably the number one inquiry to our organization is companies that have a bank solution. Depending upon what card provider you're working with out there, most of the banks provide a card solution. And what we often find from organizations leveraging bank solutions is that the solutions just aren't simply meeting the full requirements of the organization. Yes, they give an ability for someone to go out there and get to those transactions. They give some ability to go ahead and do some coding, but really what they don't have is as robust workflow. They may not have the ability, depending upon the type of organization you are, to go ahead and to do any sort of complex coding or splitting of allocations. They may not enforce policies the way organization is looking, and they may not have mobile support. So one of the first things we see is that the bank solutions are typically limited. Now, one of the advantages of the bank solutions is they typically are provided out there at a low cost or possibly no cost. And so from that perspective, organizations have to balance that, is there an ROI if we go out and start looking at third-party systems? Then we start looking at some of the other areas out there, which is the management of receipts. As we looked at that poll earlier, we saw that was the number one challenge out there, which is how do you go out there and manage receipts? And so when we go out and start looking at that, we would say certainly that's probably the biggest focus of what you're going to see from a software providers out here is providing the best possible way for us to go ahead and capture that data. The next one is certainly going to be looking at the ability to leverage some of this through mobile technology. As your user force becomes younger, and as we have folks that are coming out of school and other areas and are used to doing everything on the mobile devices, what we very quickly find is that some of this younger workforce, as they come into organizations, are looking for ways to use their mobile device to do everything. And so the nice thing is that we do have P-card technology now that can be leveraged on mobile devices. And then the last piece, of course, is getting to the data. So whether that means getting to the reconciliation reports or being able to see where spend's taking place, we want to be able to go ahead and get to that information. So we typically look at these are kind of the four main challenges out there. Again, we showed you what NAPC put out a couple years ago. What we'd like to do is do a kind of a quick poll here, just to talk about your individual process, that if there is one thing you can improve, what would it be? And so I'll let Rachel kind of push that poll out to the group again.
All right, everybody, we have the poll launched here. So the question is, if you could improve one thing about your P-cards, what would it be? Getting better data and insights, providing a better user experience, giving users a mobile solution, capturing receipts or invoices, or other. All right, we'll give another 20 seconds or so for folks to get their votes in. All right, just 5 more seconds, everybody. Still got a couple folks coming in here. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close the poll and show the results. There we go. All right, so it looks like 37% getting better data and insights, 45% providing a better user experience, 16% giving users a mobile solution, 42% capturing receipts and invoices, and 11% other.
Okay, well, thanks, Rachel. Yeah, no, and that's super helpful, and we'll certainly take you through that. And again, it's probably, as we look at kind of the result of that poll, again, it probably depends upon what type of solution you're using right now, where you're looking to improve upon that. So what we wanted to do is really spend the next few minutes kind of taking you through the different areas where we are able to address with new software and alternatives out there. And the first one I'm going to look at is just what you have from a technology perspective. It's interesting to see how much technology has changed. As I mentioned, I'm getting ready to finish 19 years here at Data Basics. When I joined Data Basics, from an expense management perspective, what we thought was pretty slick technology and very hot technology was the ability for us to put a barcode on the top of a printed out expense report, so that when employees would mail their receipts into the accounting group, that barcode would sit on a window, and then we'd be able to do quick audits out there. That technology changed to where we got to the point that we were actually having employees fax receipts in, and again, what we were creating was barcoded fax cover sheets, which again, at the time, it was quite neat for us to go out and show companies how you could fax receipts in. Thank goodness today that technology has come a heck of a lot further, and we'll certainly go through that today and start looking at how not only are we getting electronic receipts, but how we're able to actually go out and have people actually read receipts. But with technology these days, a lot has changed, and one of the first things you're going to see out there, and this is primarily as we go out and compare solutions to like what the bank provides out there, is that you now are having solutions in the market that are quite robust, but then still do provide a very simple user experience out there. And so what is neat is that there's no longer the need to go out here and have to sacrifice, that there really should be the ability for you to solve all your requirements. Now, when we talk about all your requirements, one of the other things that we're also very aware of is that depending upon the type of organization you are, you may have different requirements as it relates to that processing side. So we work with everything from government contractors and not-for-profits to manufacturing organizations and other. And again, depending upon your individual organization, what you're looking for from that data, again, may quite vary. The other piece of that process, and this goes back to really the reallocation of expenses, is letting these technologies and the solutions out there go out there and actually understand the mapping that needs to take place as it relates to the accounting side. It didn't sound like there was a big push out there for mobile apps, but there still was a demand out there, and we'll certainly talk about that. But then again, getting into the reporting piece and being able to see that information. So as we look at platforms that are easy, and again, this would be probably the biggest thing as we look at as a solution as an alternative to your existing bank system, is that this day and age, what we're seeing is that we need to put something in front of users that provides a user experience that's very simple. And when we say simple, what that means is putting information in layman terms. It means that if we can do it as much as possible is to make it so that a user would simply be able to take a picture of a receipt, have the application go in and automatically code that transaction, run it against the policy, and then create, whether we're creating an expense report or creating just a single transaction, to go ahead and have it push through the process. So the idea is that the user experience will be very simple and quick. The other piece there is that if you do have a workflow that requires multiple individuals to approve or review, that it would support the ability to have multiple levels of workflow. Now, these multiple levels of workflow can be based upon organization units and manager relationships. It may be based upon spend thresholds. So if we've got a purchase out there that's greater than a certain amount, maybe we need to have a person of a certain level be the approver for that. We also see the requirement for people to go out and look to split an allocation or split an individual transaction to multiple allocations. So maybe I have a purchase and it's for this department, but we're now trying to code this out to a specific event. So we want to go ahead and take a purchase and have it split 50-50 or 40-60 to certain events, or to a project code or some other accounting code out there. And then, of course, the ability to get to real-time reporting. Now, we talk about real-time reporting. It's not only be able to get to actionable data as it relates to the processing side of this, but also be able to get to real-time reporting for a user to let he or she know that they have card transactions out there and they need to go ahead and get those, the supporting document submitted with it. So again, it's overall just giving better visibility. Now, on the mobile app side, it's interesting is that it may not be using mobile apps to go ahead and to create and submit the actual P-card report and coding of it, but giving mobile apps access for us to go out and maybe take a picture of a receipt or to forward an email that has an electronic invoice attached out there. So when we look at mobile apps these days, if we do have users that want to do everything on the mobile app, the neat thing is that you now have very full-featured mobile apps out there that will give the ability for a user to go ahead and to do everything from beginning to end without ever having to touch a desktop or a laptop out there. And when they say doing everything from beginning to end, that means they can also go in, and if they need to be reviewing P-card transactions, they can do that from a reviewing perspective. And then at the bottom part of the screen, you'll see those real-time notifications again. So if a user is leveraging a mobile app from a provider, they should also receive push notifications. So notifications such as, you know, the end of the month is tomorrow, please make sure you have everything coded and submitted, or maybe you may be an approver, please go in and make sure you have all this approved. Now, when we go out and talk to organizations, I always say it really depends upon what they currently have in place, and that really dictates why they're looking for alternatives. But truth be told, I'll tell you the two biggest things we always hear is, one is that we're looking for a solution that's a little more robust, and number two is we want to get to better data. And so within the solution, and we'll go through and show you this here in a few minutes, is that what we are finding is that companies are demanding the ability to not only have a large library of existing reports that they can report off, but they also want to be able to go out there and do ad hoc reporting with it. Now, when it comes to ad hoc reporting, what that means is you got to take and put that reporting platform into a user set that can be easily manipulated and modified to get to the data that you want to get to. It happens way too often when we go out and talk to organizations, especially large organizations, where they say our biggest challenge is that we've got this neat reporting tool. We may be using a platform from Cognotes or someone else out there, but unfortunately, we need to have a DBA go in there and to get to that data or to write a report for us. And so it becomes a process where we submit an internal support ticket and never get to that data. So when we look at these platforms now, we say not only do you have ad hoc reporting, but you also have a reporting tool that allows you to quickly and easily modify it. Of course, real-time data. That's one of the most critical components here, is as we sit here on a Tuesday afternoon or morning, depending upon where you may be sitting within the world, that you want to see what's taken place up until this moment. And so certainly you should be able to get to that data. And then really the last piece here is that if you are someone that's interested in getting to the data, you shouldn't have to go out and then go get it. You should really allow the system to go ahead and to submit and push that data out to you. So if we're talking about a reconciliation report, or we're talking about to see what we spent by vendor, or to see department spend, instead of having to go into the tool and to run that report, what you should expect is that it would simply deliver it to you, and deliver it to you in the format that you want. So whether you want to look at data in Excel, or you're happy looking at a PDF, that data gets pushed out to you. Now, as we look at that, some of the areas that we start talking about here is, how does this work specifically for us? And then are there any challenges? And that's, again, something that we get a lot of questions about, is people say, well, do you work with this bank, or do you work with that bank? And the truth is that as you look at the technology out there, is that most banks are going to give us, and give really any tool that you choose to use, access to that card data. There are some, and again, we won't go through all the scenarios, there are some limiting, some platforms that have some limits, and some that may relate to the type of card program you're on. But for the most part, even if you're working with a local bank, if they're going to be using a Visa or a MasterCard, we're going to typically be pulling a standard file feed from them. They just are being branded and logoed based upon those individual banks out there. And so you shouldn't have any challenge as far as getting to that data. As it relates to American Express, again, there are some small business programs that may not give data. But outside of that, you're going to see that banks aren't very restrictive. They're actually quite helpful in working with third parties out there if you do want to put this data into the solution. Once we have that, one of the things that we are going to want to do, as well as other platforms, is to make sure that not only are we integrating into the bank, that we are also going to create integrations into the accounting system and other areas to help you automate the process as much as possible. So when we go out and talk to an organization and they say to us, look, I've got a challenge here, and what I would like to do is to implement a tool like Data Basics to go ahead and to streamline these processes, to give us a better solution for the users, to give us an ability to OCR receipts and other area out there. How do we make it work? How much time does it work? Or how much time does it take to deploy a solution like this? We would typically say, you'd be looking at somewhere about 4 to 6 weeks to set up a solution up from beginning to end. Now, it doesn't take 4 to 6 weeks of effort, but if we look at the overall lapse time, and what an organization would typically do when they come in there to help you guys, is they're going to go through a business analysis step. And during that business analysis step, what they'll do is they'll look at, what are your current policies? What's your approval workflow? What sort of reports do you want to get out of the system? Of course, how do we want to map this over into your accounting solution? Once they have put in place and understood what you guys are trying to do, we would then put in place what the ultimate design would look like for the solution. We would then go up and integrate and map this solution with all your existing systems. So that would mean, of course, automating the feed from the bank, and then creating what information we want to show out to the users, and then how does that information ultimately flow back into the accounting system or back out to the bank as we need to make payments in other areas out there. We would obviously test that product. We would train the users who are accessing the tool, and then we would turn it around and roll this out to the user community. Once a solution is up and running, again, we'd be looking at about 4 to 6 weeks for us to basically get ready to deploy that solution. Once it's up and running, at that point, what you'd be looking at is support, and I'm sure, again, we don't need to go through with you guys. The typical support issues are going to be out there is just, users have questions about individual processes or policies that the organization may have in place. Occasionally, they may have a missing transaction out there, and so there'd be a process in place to go out and troubleshoot that. And then you just look at general other support issues out there, like access and other items out there. So it is a process that as you look at a third-party software, that you would have a relationship between the third party, the bank, and then, of course, the folks within your organization who are managing that process. So with that, that's kind of the overall process as we look at kind of from beginning to end out there. So what we're going to do now is let's go ahead and take a look at the Data Basics solution for a P-card process. And what I will do is kind of take you through, what we're typically looking to tackle when we walk into an organization who is looking for an alternative out there. And we'll cover everything from the ability for the user to quickly and easily get information in the solution, the ability for someone to go out and to enter data, enter the appropriate data, make sure policies are enforced, and then for that person to push that off into the approval process. We would be looking for a solution to go out there and to enforce policies, to manage workflows, to make sure the appropriate individuals are seeing the right information, and then ultimately from the administration perspective, that you would have a tool in place that you can quickly adapt and change as new expense types, new policies come on board, new users, maybe new cards, so that you have a tool in place for you to go out there and manage those processes quickly and easily as it relates to that process. So what I'm going to do is transition over here to the Data Basics solution. So I've already logged in within the environment here as a user. Based upon the user within the platform, there's going to be certain things that we would turn on or off based upon who's out there. This particular user, as I come in, I'll kind of take you through what typical experience would be, is accessing this on the web. Again, we do have the ability to go ahead and get to this on the mobile devices, and today I won't go through the mobile platform, but rather show you what it looks like on the web experience. As a user comes in, a couple things you'll see right off the bat that are important. First and foremost, they can quickly see those unapplied charges out here. So as I sit here right now on the 21st of May, I can see that I have 122 card transactions that I need to go in there and to basically code before I submit that on. Now, in our case, what we're looking at for them to be coded is basically assigning the appropriate expense type to, and also assigning the appropriate supporting documentation. As we look at this process, earlier we talked about, what's the biggest challenge out there, and the number one challenge was the ability for employees to get receipts and invoices attached and managed within this P-card process. The way we manage that process within this solution is that we're going to do two things. One is we're going to provide a single platform and a single way for a user to either take pictures of receipts or forward electronic receipts or upload receipts into the process so that we have those receipts ready to be quickly attached and associated to the individual transaction line item. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to show technology to allow the solution to read the data that's in that receipt and auto-match it to the appropriate transaction line item. So as we look at the technology out there, we have the ability for a user to select a receipt and basically say process, and it'll take that receipt, it'll look at the receipt, the credit card library the user has, and match all that data together. So let me kind of take you through that process so that you guys can see in action what happens. So first and foremost, you'll notice over here I've got this receipt library. So this receipt library is an area where a user can go out and manage his or her receipts or supporting documentation. Now, in this particular case, you will notice that I have a receipt, and you'll notice over here that this receipt is coming off of an email. So what happens is, in this particular case, I've got a HubSpot transaction. So I pay this on my P-card for $250. What happens is HubSpot shoots me their invoice at the beginning of the month. And as it shows up in my inbox, I simply just forward that receipt to an email address we provide. Our application recognizes where that receipt's coming from and drops it into my queue here so that I can now go ahead and start processing these receipts. Now, the other thing I can do as a user is if I want to take a picture of a receipt, I can take a picture of a receipt with my mobile device and do the same sort of thing. I can upload it in here, or I can even upload a receipt right off my hard drive. So we're going to have a receipt library that's going to sit here, and it's going to have all of the invoices and receipts that this user needs within the process. The other thing I'm going to have here is a library of all of my credit card transactions. And so as you sit here, you're seeing here, here's the 122 transactions that I need to go ahead and to get submitted over into this process. Now, traditionally, if we're working off of a bank card system, what we're going to do is we're going to come in here, we're going to see this transaction, and we're going to simply come over here and say, I'm going to come in and what it will allow me to do, actually let's do this. Let me go ahead and open up an expense report I'm working off of. So what I would have here is I would have my list of my credit card transactions here. I could come in And what the solution is going to do is it's going to ask me to pick what the proper expense type is, and then it's going to ask me to go ahead and add the receipts to it. What I'm going to do here today is show you how we're leveraging OCR to go out and to basically put all these transactions together. So before we jumped on this presentation earlier, I actually opened up and kind of started a report here for all my April transactions, just so we had something to work off of. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come in and I'm going to open up that receipt library I have, and I've got this HubSpot transaction. What I can do is I can simply tell the system to go ahead and process this transaction for me. So what it's going to do is it's going to go in and it read the data off the receipt, and it shows me that I currently have 2 transactions that match up to that. Now, in this case, this is a recurring monthly fee, and so I happen to have 2 transactions that match up identical to that. So I'm going to simply say, let's go ahead and use this one. What it's going to do is it's now going to come in. Now, in this particular case, in this P-card processing solution, what we have done is we are teaching the application to recognize that based upon certain receipts match up to certain expense types in our solution. So you'll notice here the expense type is software and service subscription. Now, through basically the OCR and through our learning tool within the application, it's doing that smart match. So if I've got other purchases like hardware, or maybe there's other, internet and other items out there, we can tell the application to go ahead and automatically read and automatically match that information. Now, for some reason, the solution was off. You'll notice here I've got a whole other list of expense types that I can go ahead and match. But in this case, it happened to be right just because I told it I was doing an important demo here, and so it made sure it got everything right. And once I have that, what you'll see here is it's going to take and just drop that HubSpot transaction right into this report of individual transactions. And on the right side of the screen, what you'll see now here is I see the date of the transaction, I see the amount, I see the vendor. This one happened to be an example with an Amex. That's obviously a company paid within this P card. I can see the vendor. Now you'll notice down here on the bottom part of the screen, there's an allocation taking place. So this is showing that this software and service subscription is going to be allocated to this particular allocation, which is for this project 40,001, which is orbital and department. Now, one of the things we were talking earlier about was some of the challenges out there, which is the ability for a user to go out there and to go out and split an allocation if, in fact, that's something needed. So if I wanted to take this individual transaction here for this software and service subscription, and let's just say I want to split it between 2 departments, 2 cost centers, I can simply come in here and add another distribution. And what you'll see here is the solution will give me the ability to go in and to do this allocation on a percentage basis or a whole dollar amount. But what it's done now is it's going to take this $250 transaction and split it between, in this case, these two different projects and have that take place. So within the solution, we were talking earlier about these alternatives and what they provide. They provide, again, a very easy process for the user to get the data in here, and then also a very easy process for the solution to be splitting allocations. And on top of that, we can also start to enforce policies. Now, again, I did this earlier just so that we could show you how it looks within the solution, but you'll notice that this transaction here sitting up top happens to have a hazard triangle in here. And the reason for that is that this is a possible duplicate transaction. And so it's looking across other expense reports, and I purposely did this. I pulled over a transaction that matched up to one that may have been done before. Now, again, there are some other processes in place to make sure that we wouldn't have a duplicate transaction. But what you're noticing here is that this application is picking up the possibility for a duplicate transaction. Now, policy enforcements don't have to be duplicate transactions. They could also be certain spend thresholds or certain transactions we just don't simply allow to be put onto individual reports and other areas out there. So you certainly have the ability to go out there and to pick that data up and to have those sort of items managed within the individual process. And again, to go back to that process we were working at earlier, if I want to continue to add transactions, I can either work off my credit card list and simply go in, pick the expense type, add the receipt, Or leveraging OCR technology, I can continue to come through here and just simply say, let's add this transaction. You'll see very quickly it picked it up and matched it up against my Amazon transaction. Now, in this case, this person made a purchase off Amazon. Our application isn't smart enough to know what that means. And again, for those of you that have dealt with Amazon receipts, you see that. What you'll see here is it's now telling the user, you need to go ahead and pick the expense type. So in this case, I can come in here and say this is an office supply. And you'll notice that it opens up different fields out there. I can say it's a development tool. We can force the user to provide additional notes. And then I simply hit next, and it just drops that right into the application. So the process to go ahead and to start managing this works very quickly through there. As a user, I can go ahead and save this. And then again, I can see what's taking place here as I continue to work through my transactions. What you'll also notice here is that when I started this, it said I had 122 unapplied transactions. What it's showing now is I've got 120 transactions. So as a user, I can continue to see what I need to do to make everyone happy and to make sure I have all of the appropriate allocations taking place in here. And what you're also seeing here from this user perspective is that this person also happens to be an approver. So within our application here, a user can go in, he or she can enter data, they can be the approvers, they'll see real-time updates to see whether something has been approved, they can access historical data if they need to. So if I want to come out here and to see, again, my history of my reports, I can go ahead and do that. And there is also the ability to have proxies in here. So if I need to go ahead and do or to complete on behalf of someone else, I can very quickly and easily get into that information. Now, what we've looked at is kind of how do we tackle this on the front end of the process. One of the other areas that we do get a lot of questions around is really the back end of the process is what sort of information, what sort of reporting can I get to? And that's what you'll see here within this tool. So within the Data Basics platform, we do also have an embedded reporting solution that's going to give you access to all the information that you would need here within this tool. And so one of the things that we often find with P-cards is that we want an ability to quickly go out there and to reconcile information to be able to see what information is there as it relates to the individual user. And so what you're looking at here is this is a reconciliation. As we look at the reconciliation, what you'll see here is that we have the ability for us to come out here and very quickly get to information as it relates to applied and unapplied transactions. And again, going back to the terminology that Data Basics was using here, so you see here I've got 120 unapplied transactions. Well, as an approver, or maybe as the P-card administrator, I want to go out and see who those folks are that, in fact, have those unapplied transactions. And what I can very quickly get to in real time is that in these reporting tools, I can very easily see here are all the transactions for Chris Harley. Here are the descriptions. And you'll notice here, and I should have mentioned, this is the report editor. So this is where we make modifications. But what I can see here is that in the report ID, report title, and report status, these fields are currently blank. And again, because these are unapplied transactions. So what we can do is we can have a notification go out to these users to say, we understand you still have transactions that have yet to be processed. Please go in and get those completed. Now, this same view, maybe I want to see all the applied transactions. I can very easily come in there, change the transaction status, and now I can see all of those individual transactions. I can see which report they've been put on. I can see the status of it. And again, the output of these reports can come in whatever supporting format you need. So if you want to see this data as a PDF, as an Excel format, it very nicely formats it in Excel for you. Maybe you want to drop it in a CSV file because you're trying to take it and do something else with it. You have the ability to get to that data very quickly and easily here within the platform. The last thing you can do is as you look at the solution out here is, and I'm just going to open up the admin tool here, is that as you sit here, again, on a Tuesday afternoon, if you want to go out and search for individual transactions, within this platform, you can go out and start looking for information. So if you've got a user out there that says, hey, you know, I swear I submitted that purchase for $2,000 for that server we purchased, you can come out here and start looking at, and again, if you look down the right side of the screen, you'll see the individual filters out there. I can go out there and search by total purchase amounts, ranges. I can search by currencies. I can look by individual companies, departments, employees. So I have the ability to very quickly and easily search on data to see where it sits. And you'll notice here there's a report ID number. All of that correlates back to what the individual user has as it relates to the individual transactions. And again, as I open up this individual expense report where we have the P-card transactions, what you'll notice is that this transaction report has a number, and then each individual line item has a individual correlating transaction line item. So what we create is a process that allows you to easily manage, reconcile, and control what's taking place. What I won't go into today as we look at this kind of high-level demo is some of the audit trails and other areas out there, but ultimately as we look for alternatives to your P-card software, really what we're looking to do is to provide the user something that's very easy to use, of course give you guys as administrators and others better visibility, access, and control, and then ultimately something that's going to solve 100% of your requirements without you having to sacrifice in different areas there as it relates to that solution. So with that, what I'm going to do is, why don't I turn the floor over to Amanda and see if there's any questions out there, and we can certainly go in and answer any questions you guys may have, either about the solution we're looking at here today, oops, let me go back to that, the solution or data basics, or just the solutions or the process in general.
Yeah, Chris, we've got a couple of questions. The first one is, can this solution manage more than one card program? We have a P card and a T card.
Yes. So a great question. And so I know we were kind of talking about kind of the P cards out there. And the short answer is yes, we certainly can bring multiple cards into the solution. I didn't spend too much time kind of on the background of data basics, but you may have kind of caught as you were looking at the demo environment. We really had our start as it relates to kind of the travel expense side of the process. And then about 10 years ago, we saw more and more organizations that were looking to kind of expand from the travel side to manage the P card process. And so we see a lot of organizations that are managing the P cards and travel cards out there in that process. And again, a lot of times those travel cards we're talking about maybe within a travel agency or a ghost card or a BTA card, depending upon how you want to refer to them out there. But the big thing with the P card side is that we can certainly limit the data set as well. You may have seen that as I was looking through that presentation. The expense transactions for the P cards were simply related to those purchases. And I should also mention that on the travel side, in a single environment, you could actually make it so the user would never ever see the other data out there, so you could do that. But yes, we can certainly handle two cards there.
All right, another question. Does this solution have the ability to capture service start and end dates that can be used for accruals and deferrals?
Yes, so you have the ability. So as we look at the kind of the data set out there, we kind of had a fairly generic out there. We knew there were various industries that were sitting here on this presentation today, but as it relates to the data, what you guys have the ability to capture at either the report level or the line item level is really up to you as an individual organization. So we can certainly pick up any additional data, and then as you look at data on the back end, as we look at kind of the accruals and those areas out there, how we ultimately push data and manage data is really up to you as an individual organization. And so it's just a matter of how we're ultimately managing data. If you were to talk to the technology folks here, we always say, well, it's just data, and obviously it's more than just data, but it's a matter of what you need to capture at the employee level and what you need on the back end. And then kind of in between that is what do we want to show the users? And so I know I kind of went through some of it a little quickly as it relates to kind of the data entry side, but what you weren't seeing is kind of the GL mapping and how that ultimately maps. But again, yes, we can certainly do that.
All right, another question is, do you support SSO integration or SAML?
Yes, so we use SAML 2.0 for SSO, and for those who aren't familiar, SSO, it's just single sign-on. So if you're taking this application and dropping it into your existing environment, it just means that users won't need to have to use their own, or I should say, another user ID and password. So users would just be authenticating off of whatever their network ID is or whatever ID is there that you want your users to use. But yes, there's a standard SAML 2.0 integration there.
Okay, what is the system retention for receipts and expense reports?
So our standard retention is 7 years. It depends again on what type of organization you are. I do know we have some that are asking us to keep it for 10 years. That's not an issue, but our standard is 7 years. We didn't do too much kind of as far as going back historically, but what that does mean for if a user wants to go back and see that information, they'll see it for 7 years, and that also, of course, includes the supporting documentation, so receipts or invoices or any other data there.
Okay, we got kind of a two-parter now. I'm going to combine them. Is there a per user cost, and also is there a cost associated with custom reporting?
Yeah, so good question. I figured someone eventually asked about cost out there. So the way we price the solution is, so the solution is a software service. So it's basically it's a recurring monthly fee out there. What we look at is really kind of two components there as it relates to cost. One is basically the transaction volume, and so number of transactions going through the report, going through the solution, the reports, and based upon the volume is kind of what dictates the price. So obviously, the higher the volume, the lower the cost. And just for ballpark, if you guys are wondering, you're gonna, you could be, depending on a very low volume, you could look at a couple dollars a transaction. A very high volume, you could be talking, 30 to 40 cents. So it's a pretty big range there, depending upon what you have. Outside of that, you then have a configuration cost, which is going to be what an organization is looking for as it relates to kind of workflow policies and then reports. Now, typically when you look at a P-card report, there aren't too many kind of what I'll say, crazy requirements out there. We typically have a lot of things. You'll look at like an accrual report, you look at a reconciliation report, you look at like spend by vendor, department, cost center, and those items. So all of those we basically have out of the box for organizations, but that doesn't mean we don't see new ones come on board. And typically, if it's something new that we see as valuable, we would include it at no additional cost. But if it's, again, there may be a cost out there for the reporting. But most of our cost, or most of where you're going to see the cost, is just around the configuration and setup.
All right. Does this system have any fraud alert technology?
Yes. So, and again, it depends upon where you look at kind of that fraud alert, and that's kind of a good lead-in as we look at kind of moving forward. So, I kind of showed the scenario as it relates to as we look at some of the things like user items out there. So like duplicate transactions and then other areas there within the audit functionality out there. One of the things I didn't talk much about with the OCR technology is that we were looking at OCR technology to actually go out and read data and pull it into the individual reports. What you will see with Data Basics coming here this year is also OCR doing more of the administrative and checking data as it relates to the back end of the process. So we certainly do have fraud technology. It still is a huge focus as it relates to what we're doing from a technology development perspective, is what we call kind of the back end of the process. And so again, it's something you'll continue to see. If you watch us, you'll continue to see some big news as it relates to the rest of this year for what we're doing with from the OCR and some of the learning that you're able to do automatically in the back end of the process.
Okay. Now, can the violation notification, the gold triangle, hazard triangle that you mentioned earlier, can that violation notification trigger for type of spend, for example, hardware, software? And so I'll let you answer that one, and then it's a two-parter, then we'll ask the second part.
So as it relates to policies, and that's kind of those hazard triangles or validation warnings are going to be kind of the all-encompassing policies. And kind of when we look at policies, they typically can be enforced based upon a number of criteria. So it can be based upon and again, it can also be kind of an and/or statement. So it can be based upon a certain spend. So if I spend more than X, then flag this. or it could be taken into account if I spend X, but I'm in this department, or I'm of this title, or so you have the ability to effectively build policies based upon a number of criteria out there. And then as it relates to those policies, how they're enforced or what happens is usually one of three things. One is it's just going to flag the line item and say, look, there's something here that we want to have someone take a look at. Two, it may send it into some additional workflow. So it's going to go out and go to someone else for review. Or three, it can just be a hard policy where it just says, hey, sorry, we just don't accept it. Chris Harley, it's great you spent this, but we're not going to allow you to submit this for approval. But you've got a number of different criteria out there. And again, and I should have said this really about any of your questions. If there's any specific questions you guys have, we'll certainly follow up with you here today, or my contact information is on there as well. And we're certainly happy to answer kind of any specific question you have about, maybe a challenge that you guys have there internally. But Amanda, was there a second part of that question?
Yeah, the second part is related to that. So based off that violation notification, can this information be scanned off the receipt/backup documentation? That was a pretty specific one.
Yeah, so I think that may have kind of led to the question or the part of someone earlier was, can the OCR kick off the policy? And if that's not, and again, hopefully I didn't misunderstand that, but I believe the question is, can the scanning of it go ahead and create that basically that enforcement of the policy? And the answer is yes. So if it can read something that is out of policy, it'll certainly flag that. But again, if I didn't answer that question properly, please feel free to email me, and I'll make sure we get the appropriate answer for you there.
All right, we've got two more questions. The second to last question is there the ability to auto-allocate transactions based on set rules, like merchant name?
Yes. So as we look at that, so if we can look at variables within any part of the process, we can basically tell the system to do whatever it wants. I know that sounds pretty broad there, but if we have a process where we say, hey, for this merchant, it always goes to this expense type and it always allocates to this cost center, this project, this event, we can certainly go out and do that. And that's basically what you saw there what we were doing there, where I showed that example of a HubSpot service subscription coming monthly. We were telling it to auto allocate to a expense type, but we can also do back-end allocations as it relates to accounting and those components as well. All we want to do is make sure that we've got basically a standard process in place so we can read that.
All right, our last question is, can travelers enter non-card expenses into this solution?
Yeah, so that would be looking at more of kind of our travel things. So everything we were doing here today was obviously card driven, but within the database expense management platform, we certainly can go out and manage non-card spend, so out-of-pocket transactions. And if you were looking back at the screen out there, I had an example where I had a card transaction coming over, and it was basically hard coding the payment type there. But for non-card transactions, we would simply basically open up that field, and if it's again, typically it's going to be a reimbursable expense, so whether it's cash out of pocket or whatever it may be, or a personal expense, we can certainly go out there and pick that up, and again, to create a reimbursement. But I know the focus today was really looking at kind of on the P card side of that, but we could certainly pick that up, and those again, non-card type transactions. And I think, was that the last one there, Amanda?
We had one more squeak in. I think we have time to answer it, so let's answer this last one. Pertaining to fraud, is the system able to detect whether a supporting document or receipt is legit?
Oh, good question. That's a tough one there. So the true answer is no. Right now, I mean, as it looks at that. So what we would typically do, so what I didn't take you through is there is an audit tool that sits on top of all this. Unfortunately, as you look at the application right now, it's reading from an OCR right now. It's basically reading it. I won't get too technical there, but there's a process there that it's basically taking the data it's looking at and just simply extracting that data. And so it So the ability for it to, whether it recognizes whether it's a real receipt or a fake receipt, again, I believe the answer is that right now it doesn't really know that. But if there is a concern out there and you are looking for a way to get to that, there is an audit utility, and I didn't take the audit utility, but what that allows you to do is it allows you to sit and look at the approval process here, where you look at the transaction, and in a split screen, it shows you the receipt on one side or the supporting documentation on one side, and then the transactions on the other. So you can go through there and you can create your own queries. You can say, show me everything that's greater than $1,000. And so from a auditor approval or whatever, again, doesn't matter who has access to this tool, you have the ability to go through there and look at those. And so you can very quickly audit and see, okay, I'm verifying that's the appropriate transaction out there. So so there is an audit process there, and that's, again, it goes back to really the Stone Age when people first started doing expense reports, the ability to go out there and audit and look at those details. And so so that's what we would have as kind of the control mechanism in place to make sure that, in fact, we do have people submitting those details. So with that, I think we're just about at the top of the hour. I want to thank everyone for joining us here today. Hopefully, we helped give you guys some good ideas out there for ways to look at alternatives or ways to improve what you may have in place. If there are additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us directly. And as I mentioned, we will make sure we address all your questions here very quickly. If not this afternoon, but sometime tomorrow morning, you'll definitely get a response from someone here. And if you had, again, just any other items or just questions, my contact information is there, and I'm happy to always answer any questions that you guys may have. So with that, I wanted to certainly thank Rachel and the team over at NAPCP for giving us an opportunity here today, and have a nice afternoon or late morning, depending upon where you are.
All right, great. Well, thanks, Amanda and Chris, for that informative presentation and really great Q&A session. And of course, thank you to the attendees for participating. As a final note to the attendees, the NAPCP will be sending you a link to a brief online evaluation for today's virtual demonstration. We would appreciate it if you took the time to complete this, as it helps develop future virtual events. Thanks again for your attendance and have a great day.